We all know we need to change the path of climate change.
Valuable insight is vital to redirecting us to the right route.
In today's episode, we meet researchers who are on the case. These days, we all try to recycle as much as possible. But what if we could recycle absolutely everything?
From urban space to energy to CO2, fortunately, the research scene is rife with actors of change plotting a route to a greener future. And we're better than to start today's journey than at one of the world's leading research centres, Imperial College London.
Coming up, we travel underground for a new view of green urban spaces. Then we visit a smart show home like no other. Plus, we meet research pioneers plotting the potential future of CO2.
In the meantime, I met with Dr. Sarah Bodinis, a research associate here at Imperial College London, to get the latest on carbon capture and energy-saving technologies.
But first, let's delve into some facts and figures. Buildings are responsible for approximately 40% of energy consumption and 36% of CO2 emissions in the EU. Currently, about 35% of the EU's buildings are over 50 years old, and almost 75% of the building stock is energy inefficient. More renovation of existing buildings has the potential to reduce the EU's total energy consumption by 5 to 6%, and lowering CO2 emissions by about 5%. Traditional energy sources mostly come from below ground, but what if sustainable energy could come from the same place? When it comes to fully utilising urban land, researchers from the University of Cambridge are in London breaking new ground, literally. The Energy Efficient Cities Initiative, EECI, is a cross-disciplinary research project at the University of Cambridge. Since it began in 2008, it has investigated how the UK can reduce energy demand generally, and in particular, how cities can be greener, especially when it comes to built environments, district power systems, and urban planning. In a new partnership, the group is now working with the Data-Centric Engineering Programme of the Alan Turing Institute in London.
So the initial phase, which was 2008 to 2014, we worked across three main research teams: built environment, city planning, and transport. And each of these teams were co-led by colleagues in architecture and engineering. In our second and current phase, we became part of Cambridge Centre for Smart Infrastructure and Construction. And now, as you can see, we are part of the Data-Centric Engineering Programme at the Alan Turing Institute.
One of the most novel areas of EECI's work is the drive to put derelict urban areas to good use and monitor these unique environments. To see this in action, look no further than the former air raid shelters and disused tunnels in Clapham, London. So often, spaces like these are ripe for the picking from property developers, artisan coffee shops, or hipster bars. Instead, this is home to the world's first underground farm, Growing Underground, producing fresh micro-herbs and salad leaves using hydroponic systems and LED technology. Once the produce is harvested, it is delivered locally within 4 hours so as to maintain a high quality and taste.
Growing Underground is a live farm, so we monitor data differently depending on what it is. So we automatically log temperature and humidity, but also manually record crop growth. And we try to analyse all these relationships between energy, crop growth, and environmental conditions in order to be able to grow plants as best as possible with the minimal amount of energy.
When it comes to identifying underused urban areas in our city as potential farms, EECI has left no stone unturned. They are experimenting within their own office building to incorporate plants and working with schools to grow plants on their rooftops.
3 out of 4 schools in London have allotments and have integrated food growing into their curriculum. And we realised that it would be an interesting place to integrate greenhouses into, and at the same time they could be able to reuse waste heat and waste CO2 from the building itself to reduce energy consumption for the greenhouse, but also that clean air could be transferred to the school buildings and reduce the energy they need to heat and ventilate their own building.
Meanwhile, back at the Turing Institute, data analysis and modelling takes place.
We have volumes of data coming in from the farm, real time. We also have unstructured data of logs of farm activities, the crop yield, etc. and we have an engineering model of the farm. And we are exactly in the right place, being at data-centric engineering, to bring all of these different forms of information together seamlessly and get more out of that to support the expansion of the farm.
The vision of a green city centre where we all grow our own food on every available inch of land, from our rooftops to under our feet, is a utopian prospect, as is cutting carbon emissions when transporting produce and speeding up the journey from farm to fork. The question is, though, can this farming method be sustained?
The growing underground farm is a very good example where a derelict space has been put to good use. And one can think of pushing this further by tapping into environments that are rich in waste heat and CO2, for example, hospitals and school buildings for farms with a wider societal benefit.
So it looks like the farms of the future could bring us well and truly down to earth, whilst also maximising the productivity of our inner city buildings and cleaning up our energy efficiency. With research such as this, it feels like positive change is most definitely on the menu.
Dr. Sarah Budinis is a research associate at Imperial College London and the Sustainable Gas Institute in a unique academic industry partnership. Her research examines methodologies of quantitative assessment of energy systems, from the equipment scale to the global scale. Within the Sustainable Gas Institute, her focus is on energy-saving technologies and management approaches and policies which could facilitate the decarbonisation of the energy system. Sarah, thank you so much for having us here at Imperial College London. So tell me, when you think of projects that look into energy efficiency in cities and buildings, what kind of projects stand out to you as instigators of change?
So instead of focusing on a single project, I would like to go for a global ambition. So I would like to refer to the UN Sustainable Development Goals and goal number 11, which is referring to sustainable cities. So at the moment, half of the global population lives in cities, which means 3.5 billion people. And this number is expected to rise to 5 billion by 2030. So when the urbanization is really fast and aggressive, this can put a lot of pressure on natural resources. So it's very nice to have these guidelines.
Tell me your ideal vision for energy-efficient cities and buildings in 2050.
So for 2050, there are a number of initiatives that I would like to see. So the first one is about insulation of buildings. And I want to start from this one because it's a really simple idea, but it's incredible the amount of energy that you can waste when you're trying to warm up a space which is poorly insulated. Then I think there will be a more distributed generation, so the consumers will become prosumers, which means they will be producers and consumers at the same time. So if they produce more than what they need, they can sell it back to the grid, and if they produce less, they can buy. I also hope to see integration of services, so for instance, integration of heat and power generation, so you can produce electricity and steam, for instance. And also I would like to see smart houses where you can control when your washing cycle is running in order to make it at a time when the demand is lower.
When you think of energy-efficient cities, which stands out for you as exemplary and why?
There are two cities I would like to mention. The first reason is that I visited them recently, and they are Copenhagen and Amsterdam. They are both quite ambitious cities, and Copenhagen wants to become carbon neutral by 2025, and Amsterdam wants to make the transport system carbon neutral by 2025. And
is this possible?
It's difficult, but it's possible, and as I said, it's really ambitious. And the other reason to mention these two cities is that cycling is very common, and it's very nice to see how the cities developed around the cyclists and how people change their behavior when they move to those cities.
If you could wave a magic wand and mitigate climate change, what would be the most urgent changes you would make to the energy landscape and why?
If I had a magic wand, I would like to make people understand climate change a bit more. So I would like them to understand that climate change is real, that climate change is happening, it's happening now, that it's dangerous and it's also expensive. I think being aware of climate change is the first step towards fighting it.
A clean energy future is something that appeals to all of us, especially if mitigating climate change goes hand in hand with reducing our energy bills. In Denver, Colorado, researchers have their sights set on making that happen.
At the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, the NREL, researchers are busy testing how to enhance the comfort and convenience of our homes whilst saving energy and increasing the use of renewable energy. And that's all done here in the Energy Systems Integration Facility, a unique laboratory that connects appliances, test homes, and even communities in an end-to-end energy ecosystem.
So in the Systems Performance Lab, we have many of the typical devices you'd see in a home, so appliances like a refrigerator, a washer, a dryer, and then we have kind of the control layer that would go on top of that, so individual controllers at local devices that we can use to make smart decisions about how to dispatch and use those loads. But then we also have all the infrastructure all the way up to the grid. So at the most basic level, we can do research on how those devices perform, efficiency, and so forth. But really the more important questions are how do they affect the grid and how can they benefit the performance of the system as a whole.
According to the researchers at the NREL, future smart homes may not look or feel significantly different to what we live in today. But behind the scenes, our energy systems will be integrated in a transformative way. And in order for this transformation to happen, detailed research is required.
We really have the ability to take ideas on how you might control those devices or help improve the grid. We can take those to reality very quickly because we can demonstrate them in a lab environment, connect them to a simulated large-scale grid, and then we can work with partners to deploy those in the actual world and get technology to market as soon as we can.
The lab is also used by commercial manufacturers who want to see how their latest designs, from household appliances to room heaters, can be more efficient.
We can go out and talk to electric utilities, stakeholders such as the public utility commissions, and we're very involved with the regulatory side of things. But then in the laboratory, we're also working on bringing ideas to reality as well. So we see kind of both sides of implementing technology in the real world, as well as getting that laboratory R&D aspect to things as well.
An important and unique feature of the testing done here is that its simulations are accurate to real-life scenarios, including testing at full power, which researchers here call PHIL, which stands for Power Hardware in the Loop capability. The use of PHIL and other real-life testing scenarios is an important step in understanding the changing needs of power by consumers, manufacturers, and energy suppliers.
Having able to really model real-world situations out there in a laboratory environment so that we can understand the impact of these new technologies on the grid is a very important part we play. The way we play that is actually we really collaborate with utilities and grids, real grid owners out there to understand their challenges and actually take that into the lab, define it in a realistic environment for them, and understand the impact of both new technologies and also impact of the issues arising due to the new technologies. For example, very high penetration of PV causes different issues on the distribution grids. That's something which we try to evaluate inside the laboratory here and understand different mitigation measures.
Thanks to the NREL's detailed and innovative research, we may soon be smart enough to smarten up our homes and energy use, propelling us all in the direction of a clean energy future.
Sarah, a key part of your research is looking at the role of natural gas in the energy landscape. What are the key trends for how this will look in 20 years' time and in 50?
There are a number of key trends regarding the decarbonization of the energy system. So just to mention a few, fuel switching is really important and is when you move from a carbon-intensive fuel to a less carbon-intensive fuel or from a fossil fuel to a renewable source. Electrification is another one where you use electricity for space heating, for instance, or cooking. Increasing energy efficiency is an important trend where you replace an old equipment with a new one that consumes less and provides the same service. And carbon capture and storage is another trend where instead of releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, you want to store it underground.
Can you describe how an energy systems model allows you to understand the changing nature of the energy system?
An energy system model is a tool that can be used to understand how a decision can affect the energy system. So it's a very powerful tool. It's based on a lot of data, and it's also a tool that you don't use for making forecasts. So it's very well suited when you want to compare two options and understand which one is the best.
How does the MUSE model at the Sustainable Gas Institute differ from other energy models?
MUSE is a simulation model, it's not an optimization model. So what this means is that it can help you make a decision within the energy system when you have an idea of what is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, which is, first of all, quite realistic. And it's also a tool that can be used by anyone. For instance, if you want to understand which light bulb you should buy, if you want to refurbish them all, you can use model to pick the best option. And that depends on what's important for you. If you want to spend less initially, if you want to see how much you will consume over 1 year time, and so on.
How do you predict that MUSE will help international policymakers and government?
MUSE can help governments to understand the implication of implementing a certain policy. So for instance, if you want to promote investment in a green technology, you can decide to use subsidies or you can tax emissions. At the same time, if you're looking at the industry, they can use MUSE to decide how it would be better to act if there is a certain policy in place.
Thank you so much for that, Sarah. Stay with us. Now, thought you knew everything there is to know about carbon dioxide? Here's one common misconception.
You thought you knew? Think again. Myth: carbon dioxide is simply a pollutant. Fact: CO2 could in fact be a versatile resource thanks to promising carbon reuse ventures. A Canadian company, Carbon Engineering, has made a liquid fuel by taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and combining it with hydrogen from water. Meanwhile, UK-based chemistry startup Econic Technologies have pinpointed a way to turn carbon dioxide from emissions into polyurethane foams, which can be used to make thermal insulation for housing. So, with the potential to supply clean fuel for our vehicles and make our homes more energy efficient, it's clear that CO2 has the potential to be far more than just a pollutant.
Currently, we all rely on fossil fuels, but we also want to combat climate change. Well, what if we could do both at the same time? In Cambridge, Massachusetts, there's a dedicated team of researchers working on just that.
At MIT, the current focus of Howard Herzog and his colleague Professor Alan Hatton's research is carbon capture, utilization and storage. CCUS, as it's more commonly known, is a technology that captures carbon dioxide emitted from burning coal and gas, or from the process of making industrial products such as steel and cement. The CO2 captured is transported by pipeline or ship and stored underground, preventing it from entering the atmosphere and contributing to climate change.
Climate change is a very difficult problem to solve, and we're going to need as many technologies as possible to help us solve it at an affordable price. CCUS is one of these technologies, one of the weapons in our arsenal in the fight against climate change.
There are currently 21 CCS projects in operation or under construction around the world, a number that may seem low given the promise and potential of this technology to transform the energy landscape for the better.
The reason CCUS is not widely available today is that we don't have policies in place to reduce our emissions of CO2 to the atmosphere. It's always going to be cheaper to put CO2 into the atmosphere than to capture and store it. So until we have policies in place to address climate change, it's going to be very slow going for CCUS.
Meanwhile, Professor Alan Hatton and his research team have devised a new CO2 scrubber technology.
Traditional scrubber technology is one that's been around for about 90 years, and it uses a chemical solvent system that absorbs CO2. You capture CO2 into the solvent, and then you take that solvent phase when it's loaded up with CO2, and you take it to what's called a stripper. And the stripper, you strip off the CO2 from the solvent. The solvent itself can then be turned back to the scrubber side and be reused. It's a good classic recycle problem. And then the CO2 itself is now pure CO2. It can then be used for chemical feedstock, or it can be buried underground. We want to see if there are other ways in which we can do this, and what we've been looking at is using electrical sources. Because they're very clean, we can rely on renewable resources. We don't have to worry about where do we get the heat energy from to do the actual stripping.
The overall aim of this research is to develop new concepts in CO2 capture technologies and to actually implement them. For this to happen, though, there are obstacles to be overcome. Skepticism and insufficient financial backing, to name but a few.
What I envision for the future of CCUS is that we'll have policy put in place that incentivizes the technology through the marketplace, and a real byproduct of this, it will really spur innovation. So I see new technologies coming into the field, things we may not have even thought about today, that will reduce cost and help us address climate change in a more effective manner.
The prospect of continuing to use fossil fuels, keeping heavy industry in operation, and combating climate change is most definitely appealing. For now, though, in general, governments and policymakers seem unconvinced that CCS is the answer. It remains to be seen if this enthusiasm of the MIT team will be truly infectious.
Sarah, tell me, in your view, what does carbon capture and storage mean for the future of fossil fuels?
So carbon capture and storage is a technology aiming at separating carbon dioxide and store it underground instead of releasing it into the atmosphere. And at the moment it's the only technology that can allow us to use fossil fuels without endangering climate change even further. So for a very long time we have been worried about running out of oil, gas and coal, and now we know that we can use all those resources that are currently available if we don't want to limit climate change.
Can you tell me about the white paper you led and released with the Sustainable Gas Institute?
So this white paper focuses on barriers and potential for carbon capture and storage. So if we talk about the barriers, there are quite a few. So the most important one is the cost of carbon capture and storage, then the lack of a market for carbon dioxide, public perception, and location and size of storage sites. In terms of potential, we have looked at what it would mean for the use of fossil fuel to use or not use carbon capture and storage, and we know that the importance of this technology is even bigger in the second half of this century.
What do you make of the UK spending around £1 billion on a competition to develop carbon capture and then scrapping it in 2015?
One of the reasons why CCS is not being deployed at the pace we would expect is that there is a lot of uncertainty regarding this technology, regarding, for instance, the regulation. And unfortunately, I think what happened in the UK kind of decrease the faith that the industry has towards governmental decision. I think the take from that situation is that we would need longer goals that are longer than a single election.
What can be done to encourage more investment in CCS?
Now we know some of the reasons why CCS is not fully deployed worldwide. I think private companies at this point should join the discussion. For instance, the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative is bringing together the most important oil and gas companies to discuss about decreasing their carbon footprint. And it's nice to see what will come next, so which actions will be implemented.
Thank you so much for having us, Sarah. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for coming.
So, thanks to researchers who are actors for change, in the not too distant future, we could all be fully utilising every inch of urban space, living in super efficient smart homes, and all that while increasing our dependence on renewable energy and keeping fossil fuels in the mix.
Next time, we'll shed light on the startups of solar energy and gauge the full potential of solar power. We'll also have a glance at exciting innovations that could leave the energy landscape sunny side up.
And as usual, if you'd like to get a question to our next expert, get in touch on Twitter at CNBC Energy using the hashtags AskSE and Sustainable Energy. But until next time, keep thinking green. Goodbye.
Goodbye.